The hook. I'm sitting over here.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Let's call this meeting to order. I don't want to assume that we all know who everybody is, so if we could just quickly go down the line, starting with Maria.
Sure, actually,
Sure.
I'm David Bush. I'm chairman of the Park and Rec Commission.
And Maria Capriola, town manager.
Susan Messino, pending approval of the Board of Selectmen, at-large member of the Open Space Commission.
Great, thank you.
I'm Marjorie Winters. I'm chairman of the Conservation in the White House.
Eric Wellman, first selectman.
Helen Peterson, at-large member.
Jackie Battis, Zoning Commission.
Bill Rice, chairman of Planning Commission.
Great, and can the members of staff supporting this committee introduce themselves? Tom?
Sure. Tom Taversky, Culture, Parks, and Recreation.
Thanks.
Mike William, interim director of Planning and Community Development.
Great, thank you so much. So yes, Susan Messino's status is pending a vote next week by the Board of Selectmen. So she'll be participating in the discussion, but if there's any votes taken tonight, she won't be participating in that. We're going to begin with public audience, if anyone wants to speak in public audience. And just to give you an idea of how I plan to run this meeting, if there is a member of the public participating or here who wants to participate, who, there's something that comes up in conversation and there's something you want to add, just indicate, at any point during the meeting that you have something that you want to say. And that's something that I will allow to a limited degree. So that's something that I wanted to make sure that we could do. And Helen, there was something you wanted to say?
Oh, I've asked for a moment, if you will indulge me, to share some thinking and a request from me personally. It's very personal, but I try to speak in advocacy in general, and this is in regards to my invisible disability, which is I can't hear well, okay? Like, for instance, Michael, I couldn't hear a word you said. You're wonderful, you're sweet, you're great, but I couldn't hear you. But let me explain why I am saying this. I want to participate in this body. I want to be part of what's happening, let's say, for our town. There are many of us who have this problem, and they're, okay? We really want to be part of what's happening. So, you don't have to yell. What you do by request is to speak slowly so that we can catch everything you say, and that your elocution, whatever it is, try to improve it. It doesn't hurt, right? It would be greatly appreciated, and I thank you for your indulgence, and that's it.
Well, I appreciate that reminder, Helen, and please speak up any time if you're not able to hear.
Technically speaking, people have assumed in this room, in many of the meetings that I've attended over the last 55 years here, that these mics help us, but technically they don't. No. Not in this room. These are geared only to the TV that you can see by that sign there, that this meeting is being televised. And these microphones only are linked to the TV audiology. Has nothing to do with those of us trying to hear each other in this room. When I'm sitting out in the audience, when I participate in other meetings, some of you have already noticed I wear this gadget around my neck with earplugs they're provided by the town, and for those of us who can sit in the audience can use those. I have tried using them up here. They do not work because they interfere with the mic, and therefore they don't work. So I just wanted you to know that there's a perception that these microphones are here to help us hear each other in this room, and they don't work for us.
Thanks for that reminder, Helen. And again, let us know if we need to speak up.
I'm sorry if I have to ask you to repeat things.
Not at all.
I appreciate your indulgence.
So we're going to begin with public audience. Is there anybody who'd like to speak? Yes.
First, I want to thank Helen because I've already told almost everybody on the panel that the reason I don't come to meetings anymore, not the first selectmen's meeting, and this meeting is difficult in this room, is because I too have a serious handicap. I can't hear. And thank God we're televising almost all of our meetings, because I can hear it at home, but then you're a day late and $1 short of interacting with something that's said, and you have to follow up. So I don't necessarily agree with Helen that the amplifiers that are available are useful to some people. Maybe they are. They're marginally useful for my type of neuropathy and problem with. So I'm sort of piggybacking on this because I don't want to repeat something that has just been said and have any of you say, wasn't she listening? I was listening, but I might not have heard. So if I'm saying something that has already been said, I apologize. And my public audience comment is, first of all, I commented about our new selectmen, our entire board of selectmen, our town manager. When I do come to meetings, it is so refreshing to see how everyone is working together in this town. It's a compliment to everybody that serves. And unfortunately hasn't always been that way, but it is now, and it's just seeing you all here at an open space meeting. I mean, I've come here with this 1 or 2 members of the official delegates to open space, and very often there's a substitute because it's not that important. You've made this important, and this new RFQ or RFP or whatever we're calling it these days is critical to what we're doing. And I hope that included in that request for proposal is an ecologist, because so much of the land use and the ability to look at how we're using our land, it depends on sort of somebody removed a little bit and looking at the big picture, how everything interacts with one another. Anybody who's been to Turkey or Ephesus and sees it used to be a port, and what happened with global change, what happened with global warming, what happened, it's removed. It's miles away. It's no longer a seaport. Was it coal? Was it hairspray? You know, we've got to have somebody look at a big picture of what we do to correct or deal with what we know is a changed environment and a changing environment. And let's not just get hooked on, well, we got to have windmills, or we have to have solar panels, or we can't burn coal. And the ecologist is probably what I would ask for as the most important skill, training, outlook of who we're looking for to put together a plan for us.
Thank you. And I should have said this at the top. Did you say your name at the beginning?
Diane Nash, 5 Marywood.
Thanks. I just wanted to make sure we capture that for the minutes. Anybody else want to speak in public audience? Yeah.
My name is Danielle Dermo from Simsbury, and I agree with you about the importance of the RFQ that you're putting out. And I did look at what you had published, and I just noticed that I didn't see anything about protecting wildlife habitat and pollinator habitat. And I think that is critically important to be included in your RFP. for RFQ. So I wanted to mention that. It may be somewhere, but I just didn't see it on what you had sent out. And in addition to that, you're talking about a master plan, but I wasn't clear from reading whether your master plan is a 50-year plan or a 10-year plan or what the time frame is. And I was also going to suggest when you put out your RFQ that you also include some way to measure the success of how we're, have the vendor provide some type of performance measurement against how, once the plan is approved and things like that. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. I really appreciate those comments, and we're really at the beginning stages of the process, and the purpose of tonight's meeting is gathering that feedback, so that's really perfect to hear. Thank you. Yes?
Yes. Sue Brockwitz, 10 Pinecrest. I understand that the people hired to create the master plan will be given, among other information.
To come forward.
Yeah.
Get you to sit in the front as you speak.
I understand that the people hired to create the master plan will be given, among other information, the 4 forest management plans for our town forests. I am concerned that they will accept these plans as complete and approved by the town and be totally unaware of the many, many serious objections to these plans that have been raised by the public. I think it is very important that written material detailing these objections be included with the 4 plans, and I would like to be assured that this will be done.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak in public audience? Yeah.
Hi, Erin Levitt-Smith, 7 Winter Green Lane. In talking to people about this master plan, one of the things that I've heard is do no harm or harm reduction. And I'm in the mental health field, and in the mental health field we have a harm reduction model where we really help people to get into recovery by reducing their harmful behavior. And so I really think when we're looking at the environment where we use that harm reduction and do no harm, that we really do no harm whenever possible. So I think if we can look at that when you guys are thinking of this master open space plan, is I don't think it necessarily requires us to do something on every piece of land. That sometimes the best thing that we can do, and as a therapist, sometimes the best thing we can do is just sit there in silence. And I think sometimes the best thing we can do for open space and our environment is to let nature do its course. So I just hope that that's kept in mind when, as you move forward on this. I think also, taking a look at the big picture, making sure that, as this woman just stated, looking at some of the things that have been brought up to town committees before around foresting and things like that. And I agree with Diana. I think we need to use experts and experts in the field, ecology, or there's an invasives issue in some of the town land that we own. So bringing in an expert, I can tell it's an invasive, but I don't have expertise on what is an invasive and the best way to go about treating that. So I just hope that that's kept in mind as well. So,
thank you, Erin.
Would we be able to respond to some of this at this point or not? What is your pleasure?
I think that we can have that conversation during the discussion, if that works for you. So I was thinking as we, the purpose of tonight's meeting is really to give town staff feedback on the draft of the RFQ that they provided. And I see items 3 and 4 on the agenda as really being one and the same. My thought is, before we dive into the weeds of what was actually provided, it would be helpful to have a discussion with this group about what is it that we want to get out of a master plan. What are we hoping that is delivered at the end? Because as I've had conversations with people over the last 6 months, depending on who you talk to, you hear different ideas. And I think it would be helpful to capture some of those before we give them direct feedback on that document.
Okay.
So, Helen?
Oh, thank you. My response to some of the comments that I thought I turned it off.
No worries.
Please forgive me.
We're going to take a brief commercial break and we'll be right back.
I did it, for sure. Did anybody see me doing it?
Oh, now I see it.
Now, again. Okay. I'm very sensitive, super sensitive, to some of the things that you have reminded us of today. And I'm to, let's say, open the discussion about the RFQ draft as we have received it. My sensitivity went to, I think, an okay place, and I don't wish it to sound as though I am being super, let's say, critical at the outset. It's a working document. It's a work in progress. However, I did notice, and I was sensitive to the issue, that in the RFQ, a lot of the language comes from a perspective of Parks and Rec. I did not hear or read in the language as enough to say about the open space pieces in town. Having been here for so long and been at it so long, we need to historically remember forever why we chose to conserve, not only for wildlife, mental health. All of these issues have become more, and especially the mental health issue has come to the foreground far more recently, and we've become aware of it. But I think historically we have to consider that what is in the RFQ, it doesn't show that. In other words, let me see if I can put it in a different way for you. The needs and the desires of a town for recreation. Open space is given a role in passive recreation, but it is not considered, I think, from the perspective that it be left alone, in part, for those very valuable reasons that we conserve the lands to begin with. What they give us in physical health, as far as breathing good air, what it gives us in mental health, so we can walk through the forests and derive what we can in that way. I think we need to be careful that that essence of the open space requirement by the citizens of this town be carefully acknowledged and brought forward historically, so that we can look at this master plan from that perspective as well. And especially in the last couple of years, some of us in this room have been privy and part of the greater discussion about how we look at our forests and what they should be given in stewardship. And those discussions have taken place in this committee, at the Conservation Commission. Those of us who have gone to the Conservation Commission from this committee to participate, and they allowed us to participate in those meetings, it was extremely valuable. But the rest of the committee, I think, might not have taken that opportunity. It wasn't convenient. Some of us, especially Parks and Rec, they meet on Thursday evenings too. So, it doesn't always work that easily. But we need to at least be aware, and we need to share that information now, again, going forward in this process. So that's my...
Yeah, I would agree. We had a lot of discussion in the Conservation Commission that I think would be helpful to the RFQ. We have many residents in Simsbury. Not all of them vote. Some of them are quite furry and have feathers. So they are also residents and provide ecological services. And I think, as Helen said, there are reasons why we preserved open space. It was not just for us to walk through the woods. There are ecological benefits to having these open spaces that I think we need to appreciate as well. I would love to see conservation on the interview panel.
Eric, if I may, David Bush. First of all, I want to appreciate there's a lot of work that's already gone into this document, and certainly we're here to discuss that and to improve on it. One area, though, that I think has to be considered, I've heard the word twice now, is stewardship. That we need to maintain our open space in an appropriate fashion. But in order to maintain this in an appropriate fashion, I think this RFP really needs to take into account the man hours that are required to properly take care of that land. And that anything that we're talking about as part of the RFP and maintaining, as you can hear, I'm not talking about parks, I'm talking about open space. You go for a walk over there, you know, through town forest, and I can tell you how many trees are down that need to be removed so people can safely pass through those trails. So I hope that one of the considerations here is a real solid fiscal analysis as to what the town needs to spend, and then the town's commitment to spend those funds as well. Because plan's only as good as your ability to actually implement what needs to be done. Thank you, Eric.
Absolutely. Thank you. You know, before we go any further, I should have probably done this off the top. I'm wondering if it would be helpful if Maria or Tom wanted to say any words about the process, and I probably should have started there. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I thought that would be helpful.
Probably both chime in. So again, Tom and I are both still new. I'm about 7 months in. Tom is now 2 months in. But we were presented, I think, with this wonderful opportunity, and that there was approximately $100,000 that was budgeted prior to our arrival in the past fiscal year for this purpose. The funds have been sitting there for a while, and one of the things I had shared with Tom when I onboarded him was that this was something I wanted to get off the ground and wanted, you know, to prepare a draft RFQ and get this project going. We have the funds, let's move forward. So this was staff's first attempt at putting together a draft RFQ. Again, it would be comprehensive to look at our parks as well as our open space. And then, again, just working with samples and thinking about some of our needs. Took this first attempt, wanted to get feedback from this group. We're also planning to get feedback from the Parks and Rec Commission at their next meeting as well. And then in terms of process, typically for RFQs, we will narrow down from our recipients a smaller group of folks that we would actually interview, put together a team of folks to interview those firms. And we can kind of talk a little bit as we get further along in the discussion today about composition and whether or not you want those to be an open session or not. So if you don't want those interviews with firms to be an open session, we would have to go with a smaller scale group of folks participating, and again, we can kind of talk about pros and cons of that as we move forward. So again, this is sort of just that first step in issuing the RFQ and trying to identify a firm that we want to work with on this particular project. Tom, do you have anything you want to add?
I will confess, or I'll fall on the sword. From a Parks and Rec perspective, you know, I put most of the thought into it as far as what you're seeing, that, you know, what we're looking for. So if I didn't lean forward enough on the open space, I apologize for that. This is my first run through with this, so, you know, with the information and the comments from the audience today, certainly it's very helpful as to what, you know, what you're looking for. And obviously I wasn't here last year when the group had met previously to kind of put some thought into it. So going forward, you know, the comments and suggestions will be taken into consideration going with that. But when the firms, when the RFP does go out, the firms typically have, I mean, as somebody mentioned, an ecologist and other things, these firms do have those different experts on board, and if they don't, they contract, you know, they'll contract it out and bring those people in. So, you know, maybe not necessarily an ecologist, but maybe whether it's a landscape architect or an environmental scientist or an engineer, civil engineer, or those types of things, they have those people in their firms typically and they're involved in the process, and typically they'll make that known during their proposal process. So they'll, so I know those concerns would be addressed, you know, when we'll revamp this a little bit and you know, have some more of those open space concerns addressed in the next version of this, next draft of the RFQ.
Before I open up the floor for more comments on this, did you have any immediate questions based on anything you've heard so far?
No, just, again, I think as Tom indicated, it's actually really helpful feedback for us. Again, with us both being so new, we weren't here for previous conversations. This funding was actually allocated in the 17-18 budget, so this capital project would have been discussed winter of 16-17, and so that definitely predated us. So I think getting some feedback from this group today will be very helpful in going back and making edits to the draft RFQ.
Right. Okay. So what other thoughts do committee members have?
Eric? Yeah. At some point, there was an inventory taken of the open space in town. And I'd like to suggest that in the RFQ, we ask whoever's contracted to do the work to see if they can identify any current open space parcels that could potentially be sold or disposed of in other fashions, specifically areas that take a lot of effort to maintain but don't return a lot of value. So I think that when you look at the inventory, there's a lot of smaller areas that the town has to maintain, and maybe there's an opportunity to kind of limit the amount of money we have to spend on maintenance.
You mean deaccessioning, in other words? The town disposing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. There's, I think the town has a regulation or some type of governing document to dispose of, I'm talking town-owned land, not things that are in the conservatory or something like that.
Yeah, please.
I would just make a comment, having been in real estate for 35 years. What is considered not an important piece of open space often is the very reason somebody bought a piece of property that abuts maybe a small piece of open space. So when you say it has no value,
Limited value.
limited value, not to the person who bought that property because it was adjacent. Had discussion with Tom Roy over the years about what do you do with some of these innocuous pieces without disrupting the value that was understood permanently preserved adjacent to my property. And rather than look at ways of disposing of them, I would rather we put emphasis on how do we minimize the responsibility and cost to the town.
I agree with that. It scares me.
All I ask is it be evaluated.
Sure. But I appreciate both sentiments. Yeah.
Excuse me, Eric, I have to run.
Sure.
Jerry Wetchen is a member of my commission, so if there were any other questions, you also have Tom available. I apologize, but I did want to at least be here for the initial part of this.
Great, thanks for being here. Maria?
If I could just add a bit of feedback to Bill's point. Something I have received from feedback from staff since I've been here is that some of our parcels that may have been maybe very early acquisitions before we became more sophisticated in what, as a town, we were willing to accept. So you may have a parcel that's very small. It might only touch one or two properties. It might, be just a little skinny piece of property between, again, two properties. And what often happens is that over time, people don't even realize that it's open space, and property owners will start to encroach on that. And then, as staff, we hear about it when things like, trees have begun to fall or tree limbs start to fall, and there's confusion: is it ours? Is it theirs? And so I think it's maybe perhaps, and Bill, please correct me if I'm wrong, maybe some of those types of parcels that we're speaking to, like, oh, could that parcel just be returned to the two abutters?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I want to make sure I understood that. I think what you were talking about and what I understood were the same thing. Thank you.
I wanted to follow up on a couple of things. I'm sorry that Mr. Bush left because I agree with him, and I think that I've been thinking about these issues for a long time and went to all of the open space meetings or watched them on TV, went to all the Conservation Commission meetings and watched them on TV. And I wrote my own list of the best possible outcome of the open space master plan. And point number 2 is a streamlined plan for monitoring, maintaining, and updating our open space to reduce risk and save money and staff time. So I think that should be hopefully something that the firm can look at. I also noticed, and great minds think alike, because Helen and I did not talk about this, but about the open space aspect in the RFQ. And I wrote a little paragraph that I thought maybe could be inserted into kind of the front piece of the RFQ. And just to save time, I could just read it and see if people hate it. I can throw it in the trash. And if they like it, maybe you can insert it. But, so open space in Simsbury is over 30% of the total land area. I think that's accurate. And highly valued by the town's citizens and visitors. Protected lands include recreation areas, farmland, different types of parks, trails, corridors, and connections, historical features, a wide variety of different habitats, including wetlands, grasslands, thickets, shrubland, and forest. This large amount and diversity of open space protects our water and supports biodiversity, recreation, and our cultural history. Healthy, resilient ecosystems and open space regulates the climate, purifies our air and water, reduces flooding, provides wildlife habitats and corridors, and improves mental and physical health of the public. The overarching goal is to protect and maintain a healthy and diverse open space network in Simsbury, considering properties owned by the town, neighboring communities, the state, the Simsbury Land Trust, and other entities, with amenities that serve the needs of and promote the health of the entire community and the environment. So I thought that would just kind of give a little more context to adding to the park's facilities and maintenance and things like that. It's just,
I think you've covered it all.
Yeah.
I mean, the minute I stopped talking, I said, oh, I forgot to mention that and that and that, but you have it all organized for us.
well, you know, I try to be efficient on these things.
Oh, you're a professor.
I see you made copies enough for all of us.
I
so.
did, actually. Do you want me to pass them out?
Oh, please.
Yeah, please
I only
do.
brought 12. I wasn't expecting so many people. This is usually a very small meeting, but maybe commission members can share 2 by 2 or something, and
Absolutely.
I can pass them to the audience.
Sure.
Oh, thank you very much.
And speaking of inventory,
Maria, you want to?
the connectivity of our land, although the town has land, the Simsbury Land Trust also has land, and there are other entities, water companies and things. How those other lands are managed also affects
They're going pretty far.
our open space, the town open space. So I'm hoping that in the RFQ,
Okay.
they do look at, it's one of the things that will be looked at, is what's going on in the other open spaces in town. I mean, I don't want to make this too broad, but we know that some areas are being managed for logging, some are managed for water reservoirs, and Simsbury Land Trust has land that they manage. But what happens in those adjacent lands also has profound impacts on our town land. Actually, what happens in our backyards has profound impacts on our area. If we were talking about invasive plants, what we do in our own backyards has a huge impact in what happens in the land. And one of the things we might want to look at, or the applicant might want to look at, is what can we do to educate our citizens about what not to plant in our yards that we're going to escape into the thing, because why should we waste our money removing these things from while we're busy planting them in our own backyard. So I think there are a lot of connections and interconnections of these lands.
Any additional feedback? So one thing I wanted to make sure we talked about is a process going forward, because I know this is going to go through some various drafts and there's going to be an interview process. And I know the recommendation from Maria is appointing one person to represent open space as part of the interview process, which we can, would it be appropriate to talk about that at this meeting?
Sure, absolutely. And this goes back to some of the comments I made earlier about whether or not this group, as well as Culture Parks and Rec, would want to have the interviews with firms in open session. I think there are pros and cons to that. If we have, I would say, 2 or more members from this group or 2 or more members from Culture Parks and Rec, I do believe that we would need to have those interviews with potential finalists in open session. Again, I don't think that there's, and wanting to be transparent and things of that nature, I think there's definitely some advantages to doing that, and particularly if there was a larger interest to say have 2 members from this group and 2 members from Culture, Parks, and Rec be involved in reviewing the responses and helping us interview finalists, and again, sort of getting to that preferred firm that we would ultimately negotiate with in terms of a price and a contract. So yeah, I mean, we could do either. We could do a smaller group and hold those interviews in closed session, or we could have a slightly larger group and interview those firms in open session.
Okay, so it sounds like you don't have concerns about either approach?
No, I think I'd be comfortable with either. It's really, I think, whatever this group and Culture, Parks, and Rec are most comfortable with, and we could work with either.
I noticed one other item on, in the introductory remarks for the RFQ. In paragraph 2 you give some background and existing information about the town, so to speak. And you talk about the town, how it started, and then you mention down on line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that the town has appointed the Open Space Committee and that we have the Culture, Parks, and Recreation Commission. But I think you also need to mention the Inland Wetlands, the Conservation Commission, because they have certain statutory responsibilities toward open space. And I just think that should be part of any action going forward. The Conservation Commission has a role to play. So.
Thank you. So I don't know if Jerry or if we have others from Parks and Rec. I don't know if I'm not asking for you to speak for your committee, but do you have a sense whether there's going to be interest in 1 or 2 members from Parks and Rec being part of this process?
Yes, definitely so.
2?
Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like then that there's no downside then in this group selecting 2 people to be part of the process if there were 2 that were interested. Is there anyone interested in participating in the interview process?
I would like to suggest someone. I know that Susan is just coming aboard, but I also do know a little bit about her background professionally. And I do know that she has extensive experience in interviewing at the university level. I do know that. And so I think she has a quality and some skills that would be good for the process.
I would second Susan's nomination pending the Board of Selectmen's approval of her joining the committee. Is that something you're interested in, Susan?
I would be interested in it, but I'm thinking now that people are bringing up the Conservation Commission, and we're thinking about having 2 people maybe from this board and from Culture, Parks, and Rec. I would like to nominate Marjorie as the representative from Conservation Commission, because if she's willing to do it, because I know she's already on this and Conservation Commission, but that would be kind of a natural, liaison kind of role. So.
And I second that as well, if you're interested. Yeah. Great. Good. Is there any other?
That would be for the entire interview process?
Right.
I think so.
Right. So that would be folks that would be assisting myself and Tom and Mike with reviewing the responses, whittling down those responses to about 3 to 4 firms that we would bring in for interviews, helping us develop questions that we want to use for interviewing those firms, actually conducting the interviews, and then again helping us ultimately narrow down to a preferred firm that we want to work with. And then typically, in terms of negotiating price and contract, I would sort of take over that last.
And who makes the final decision on who to negotiate with?
Right, so I would envision it as being a collaborative process, and I've usually found in these experiences that there usually is either 1 or 2 firms that most people start to have a lot of energy towards. Typically, you start to get down to 1. And again, hoping that it would be a collaborative process and through consensus that we could find some agreement with a firm that we all felt comfortable with.
But does this committee need to vote on it?
No.
No, okay. Yeah. So I'm comfortable with the 2 nominees.
So with your line of questioning, did you have concerns about wanting a more inclusive process, or are you comfortable with where
I'm comfortable with it, yeah.
I wanted to ask a question about the timeline on this. So there would be the RFQ, the intention is for the RFQ to be open during October, and the firms need to submit an intent, letter of intent, or basic documents. But then there's a separate scope of work. Is that scope of work submitted in advance before the interview as well, or is that what they present in the interview process?
That is what they present as part of their response to our request for proposals. So that's part of the initial process.
So this would be submitted in October, the scope of work as well? Okay.
Yeah.
I see. So that's not a lot of time for firms to kind of, unless they're a firm that's already familiar with the town, it might be difficult to kind of wrap their head around, you know, they're supposed to review our inventory, the POCD, and all that kind of stuff.
I think
maybe I misunderstood your question.
Oh.
No, I think at that, I mean, unless I misunderstood your question, I think at that point, they're presenting, they're not doing the project in a month. What they're doing is they're basically coming back to us and saying, this is what we can do for you, this is how we're going to do it, and this is what it's going to, this is what it may, you know, basic outline of what it may cost you, and how long it's going to take. This is what our timeline may look like. And then we choose out of those 10 we get back.
I see. You
choose the ones you want to interview out of that. And that's kind of what we're getting back. Then they go on. We pay them to go do the work after that.
Right.
Yeah. They're not really doing a lot of legwork on us at that point. Minimal legwork on us at that point. They're basically kind of taking what they've done before and saying, here's what we can do for you. We've done this. In references and that kind of thing. You know, that's where they kind of, you know, bring out the dog and pony show kind of thing. And hey, this is what, you know, what we're going to do. Not specific to Simsbury necessarily.
If I could interject something from a standpoint from Parks and Rec, I've been involved in RFQs for golf courses in the past. And typically it behooves the person that's going to answer the RFQ to do their homework.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, exactly.
It's their responsibility to do the homework because they want to get paid and they don't want to do more than what they feel they are going to get paid for. So it behooves them to do their research. You know, we provide through the public forum all the information that's available, and they have to do the research to come up with a dollar amount and what their scope of work will be.
Mm-hmm. Right. Just because, you know, I prepared like 8 pages just for today, so I thought, you know, if it's a firm that wants to wrap their mind around this thing, well, you know, this is what they do, so that they should be able to do it within that timeline.
Okay. Ray, do you recommend that we take a formal vote to appoint these members as liaisons, or can we do that by consensus?
Consensus, is that right?
Well, I'm sorry, I missed that.
Oh, I just asked if we should take a formal vote on appointing these two people as liaison, but Maria said we can do it by consensus.
Okay.
Okay. Is there any other conversation on items number 3 or 4, the RFQ process? Unbelievable feedback. Thank you so much, and I appreciate members of the public coming as well and providing feedback. Who here was present?
I'm sorry, I do.
Oh, sure.
Because we have just been in our literally first year of the big transition, and I'm not sure that I understand exactly how the staff will be interfacing with this committee or any other committee, and how they plan to keep those communications in place, or I don't understand that thread, and I was wondering if you could explain how that works now.
Sure. That's a great question. So for my position, I provide primary support to the Board of Selectmen. There are a handful of other boards and committees that I'm involved in or providing support to, particularly where the manager's office would have a role. For example, let's say in open space acquisitions, the manager would have a role in negotiating price and working on the agreement with the town attorney. So that's a really good, for example, but I think it's important for me to provide staff support to you all because I'm going to be involved sort of at that tail end when it comes down to negotiating. But also it's very important to me, and I've had this conversation with my leadership team very early on in my tenure, that we have staff assigned to most of our committees. And making sure that we're providing good staff support so that we're helping take care of the nuts and bolts so you all can do the important policy work that you need to do. So you're not worrying about things like agendas and minutes, we're working with the chairs to prepare the agenda and making sure that it's covering everything you need. But in terms of actually preparing it, distributing it, getting it posted, I think we're trying to do a really good job of doing that, as well as preparing the supplemental materials, again, distributing all of that. I think we've been doing a pretty good job of communicating with our various commissions and community members through email, and trying to keep people updated as we can through email, sending calendar invites with reminders about meetings. So again, our staff will mostly be providing support and technical expertise where needed. But the important policy conversations and decisions, that's all that's you. That will be all you. The policy piece is you. We're implementing your policy and your vision.
Okay. Well, then I may have a follow-up question when it comes to our discussing the calendar. Okay.
I have a staff follow-up question. So if I had some other, little edits or little things that might want to be added, would I funnel that to you?
That'd be great. That'd be very helpful.
Absolutely. Oh, good. That saves poor Tom.
We'll talk.
Exactly. Yeah, you funnel it to me, and Tom and Mike and I will be working on the edits.
All right.
How receptive are you to receiving questions like a simple one, maybe, but it's something that I wanted to ask about? For instance, you wrote in, again, in the document that you shared with us, the draft on purpose and so forth, the last line of that paragraph, I don't understand. Beginning with opportunities to reuse municipal and/or non-municipal sites for passive recreation.
Tom, do you want to?
Where are we on this?
It's the last line in the paragraph, purpose. First paragraph, purpose. The first page of the RFQ.
Okay, it's a funny question. Maria had a question on that too. So the thinking here is if a parcel was identified, say something that we're not going to be, for instance, I'm just going to throw it out there, it doesn't mean anything, but say the landfill, for instance. Say the town had interest in closing the landfill. Windsor, where I live, did this. They've identified a closing date. They're going to close it. What could it be used for down the line? And this, like you identified. Is this a 10-year plan? Is it a 20-year plan or 50-year plan? I don't know that we've identified that yet. Typically, master plans are, they're not doing 50-year plans anymore. It's, 3, 5, 10, maybe 15. Everything's evolving so quickly. But, if there's a parcel in town that, I'm still new, that we've identified, that the group has identified as, say, the landfill, as a passive recreation site down the line, or maybe a school is closing, or, again, just throwing things out there. Maybe there's a site the municipal site that we're not going to be using anymore that could be reused as, not necessarily an athletic field, but passive recreation, or reused for like the landfill hiking trails or something like that.
Go mountain climbing on Mount Trashmore.
So, but there are towns, as landfills are closing, they are being reused as
Okay.
Different sites, golf courses, parks.
Well, questions like that. So I'm just wondering, how do you welcome or not welcome these questions?
Please send them to us, and then we'll
do you prefer telephone calls as opposed to, say, can I come in and review something with you? What is your preference?
Sure. So my calendar right now is really tight for the month of September. So probably the quickest and easiest way is to send an email because I do have also a bad habit of checking that in evenings and weekends. So probably an email is best. But if it's something that was really immediate,
You're talking to a dinosaur that has struggled to come into the 21st century, but I'm trying.
But well, that's good to know. So if I'm not available, I can probably make Tom or Mike available.
No, that's what I needed to know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Just about to ask if anyone present here was here on November 8th of 2017. Think back to that day, because we're supposed to approve the minutes. They look pretty good to me, but I wasn't here. So can we approve them by consensus, Maria?
I move that we approve through the minutes of November 8th, 2017. I read through them, I was there, I do remember it, but I have no comments about.
So as the only person who is there, we can actually approve minutes by consensus, so I think they can stand as presented. So.
I'm the only one here that was there.
I watched it on TV. I guess.
It does.
Okay.
But all right, I think we're set with the minutes. Is there any feedback on the 2019 meeting schedule?
I have a question. I am supposed to be retiring, right? So I'm not looking for a lot of extra work and a lot of extra meetings, but I do have a question regarding how did you arbitrarily decide that we should be meeting quarterly? I will add a comment here. As this committee has existed for almost 20 years, yes, we were busy in acquisition, we were busy all through those years, and we were meeting monthly. I think as we have moved, not to say that we don't ever acquire again, you never say never. Something will come up that is valuable and should be considered. But we've moved into the question of stewardship, and we've struggled with it for the last couple of years, back and forth with the Conservation Commission, trying to establish some policy, and we've not been that successful with all of the transition. It's very understandable. But I'm thinking going forward that because we are going to be into the execution and implementation phase of the master plan, that a quarterly meeting might not cut it. I feel that we will, in other words, the Culture Parks and Recs will be meeting monthly. The Conservation Commission will be meeting twice a month. Oh, wait a minute. You meet?
Once a month.
Once a month. Twice a month. And I think that this particular committee needs to have a presence at the table with so much that will be concerning how we stored our open space. And I'm just questioning that particular setup of meetings, and I don't know how you decided.
So I guess first, Maria, would you want to share your thoughts on why you set it up quarterly?
Sure. So this again is just a sample, just to get the conversation started. We can also talk about the day of the week, the time of the week, if that's helpful for people's schedules, if we should have a different day, a different time. But I did want to get the meeting schedule on the agenda for today because the committee hadn't met in such a long time, that in the event that the committee doesn't meet again this fall, I just wanted to make sure that we were thinking about dates for next year and that we were able to file our regular meeting schedule in compliance with the FOIA requirements. So it was,
go a little bit more slowly, I'm sorry.
Sure. So I wanted to make sure that this committee would be filing their 2019 meeting schedule in compliance with the FOIA requirement. So in the event that you don't have any new business for the remainder of the fall, I just wanted to at least get the committee thinking about a meeting schedule for next year. Again, how frequent, days, times, that can all be changed. Again, my thought was, to my knowledge, we don't have any current parcels that we are negotiating with any property owners or have anything sort of in the pipeline. So not having any potential pieces for acquisition in the pipeline. And again, given that the committee hadn't met in a year, I thought, well, we could at least have the 4 regular meetings established, and then if there were special meetings we needed to schedule as needed, we could certainly do that if something became, a potential parcel became available to us. But again, if folks feel that it needs to be every other month, or that we have the dates at least on the calendar, we could certainly do that. This was just to get the conversation started.
So what do others think about meeting frequency?
I think previously it was decided that it was going to be every 2 months. I think it was every 2 months, and I was prepared for that when I was interviewed to be on the Open Space Commission, so I had kind of already tagged in my calendar November, January, March. And one way we could reduce that a little bit is maybe skipping in the summer. A lot of commissions skip their summer.
That has been the case, Susan. I just not to correct you, I think.
Okay.
For instance, we went to, from the monthly meeting, we did not meet in August for a while at the beginning.
Okay.
Then we moved to a every other month schedule, and we cut out one summer meeting. And then next week moved to every other month and cut out the 2 summer meetings. So then that meant that we were meeting 5 times a year. Now it moves to the quarterly. So I'm thinking, maybe Susan has an idea, that's good, that maybe if we could stay with the every other month, and should we, let's reverse the thinking and say, should we find that there is not enough of an agenda to have us meet, we can consider that rather than the other way around where you, let's say, you have to find an agenda to have a meeting. I just feel like this next year, being in transition and being, we should be more involved in a policy way, even though we are not statutorily required to be involved in a policy way with this committee and its overlooking the stewardship of our open land. I just think we need to be at the table. We've always, all these years, the public audience has always come to our meetings. And so I'm just thinking that we should try that one more year rather than change drastically. That's my thought.
Would there be anybody opposed to doing every other month, understanding that we can cancel on the lack of agenda items if that happens? Okay.
Great. And how about this particular day, time? Is this a good time for people, a bad time for people?
It's good.
Is this time is this something that's been questioned? I didn't catch that.
No, we're just making sure that this time is good for the group.
Okay, I'm fine with it.
Yeah.
So would you then want to set up your meetings if we went with every 2 months, January, March, May, July, September, November?
You can assume that you can, let's say when the summer months come, do it the old-fashioned way. Just, don't have them if you don't have anything on the agenda.
Skip July's optional. Okay. For sure.
And to that end, I'd encourage any member of this committee to provide any thoughts on agenda items that you might have.
I'm sorry, Eric, I missed what you
Oh,
said.
I was just going to say, I'd encourage any member of this committee to share any thoughts of agenda items that you might have, because there are some that I have in my mind. I know we'll get some agenda items from staff, but I'd really lean on this group too, to say, this is something we should be talking about. So before we adjourn, is there anything else anyone wanted to bring up? Well, thank you all very much, and I think it was worth the wait. Thank you all for getting together. When's our next meeting? Oh,
We don't.
It's November.
is it no? Yeah.
The Board of Selectmen lists the board members and their email addresses. It would be helpful if, because as a member of the public, I may not have a question that's appropriate to use up your time, but a clarification maybe on something somebody said. So if that could be listed like other committees in town, or commissions are listed with their email addresses, that could be helpful.
Yeah. Thanks for that feedback. I don't know if that's something, I don't think that's something that we do universally for non-elected boards. I'm personally supportive of that, but I want to better understand why we don't do that today, but I really appreciate the sentiment, and we'll look into that.
It's almost always a way of getting in touch with people.
Yeah, and I was going to say that no matter what, you can always reach out to me, and I can reach out to any member of this board.
And just one piece for the members of this group who aren't on one of our elected boards, and if you do not have an official simsburyct.gov account. So those typically are reserved for town employees and elected members of our boards and commissions, is that if you are using a personal email address for correspondence related to the committee work, should we ever receive an FOI request, your personal emails related to the committee work would be disclosable. So it's just something to think about in terms of retention, that if you are corresponding with folks in your capacity as an open space committee member from a personal email account, to just remember to hang on to your emails in the event that we would ever receive a request for those materials.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Where's the
I do.
I don't know if you're a friend.
You look very familiar. I know the name.
Well, you might know Bryce.
Oh, yeah.
People say, they're like, you guys look so good. I know because she did the Zumba.
Yeah, how's she doing?
She's good, yeah, she's so Atlanta. Her youngest just went off to college. So they're empty nesters now, so she was like, it's kind of weird.
How and I work together.
It can happen if there's a vacancy, right? And then to try to fulfill the composition of a particular board or commission, needed to fill those vacancies, and then ultimately the board of selectmen approves that.
Flew to Atlanta for Jenny's graduation.
There's still minority representation rules that come into play, yeah. And also, someone who's appointed, they step into the term of the person that vacated that spot. So if the election were going to be five months later, they have to run for to be elected. Yeah. But there are several purely appointed boards. Okay,
Thanks for coming today.
public building committee, people they're not elected.
It's like we have the same.
Nice to meet you.
Have a good evening. But it's a little bit one full time thing.
I need to know.
We only have one full time
So did I. Okay, see you, Jackie.
Money there.
That's your response.
Well, we're meeting